Navigating IVF is, well, it's an emotional roller coaster. And if you're dealing with conditions like endometriosis or adenomyosis, it can really feel like the odds are stacked against you. But what if that first try isn't the whole story? A new study is giving us a much clearer picture of the entire journey. And the results, well, they're a lot more hopeful than you might think.
Okay, first things first, let's really get to grips with the two conditions at the heart of all this research. They're a huge part of the story, and they create some very real challenges for women who are trying to start a family.
So, what exactly are endometriosis and adenomyosis? Well, to put it simply, they're conditions where tissue that's supposed to be growing inside the uterus decides to grow where it has no business being, either on the outside or deep inside the uterine wall itself. You can almost think of it as a kind of internal chaos that can make it a whole lot harder to get pregnant. And, these are not rare conditions, not by a long shot. We're talking about 20 to 50%. I mean, that's up to half of all women who are going through treatments like IVF. That's a huge number, and it really highlights just how important this research is.
And that high number is exactly what led researchers in Sweden to ask a really crucial question, one that goes way beyond the usual one-and-done approach you see in a lot of IVF studies. You see, most studies only look at that very first IVF cycle. But let's be real, that's just a tiny snapshot, right? It's not the full story of what so many people actually go through. This study wanted to see the whole picture by tracking women across 3 complete, publicly funded treatment cycles. So, how'd they do it? Well, they used what's called a prospective cohort study. Fancy term, but all it really means is they followed a group of over 1,000 women right from the very beginning of their IVF journey. Now, about 28% of these women had a diagnosis of either endometriosis or adenomyosis. The researchers then just tracked their progress and compared their outcomes to the women who didn't have these conditions. All right, so what happened after that first attempt? Well, the data quickly shows us that initial hurdle we've been talking about. This flowchart here is basically the roadmap for the whole study. You can see the 2 groups. On the left are the women without endometriosis or adenomyosis, and on the right, the women with these conditions. It lets you follow their paths through all 3 IVF cycles, showing who had a baby and who moved on to the next round. And boom, this is where you can really see it. This chart lays out the difference in outcomes right from the get-go. I mean, just look at the height difference in those first 2 bars. There's a really obvious gap. Let's put some hard numbers on that, shall we? After that first IVF cycle, women without these conditions had a live birth rate of 45.1%. For women who did have them, that rate was 30.7%. That is a big difference, and it really confirms the tough impact these conditions can have, especially at the beginning of the journey. But hang on, because this is exactly why this study is so important. The journey doesn't end with one cycle, and as we're about to see, the story gets a whole lot more nuanced and, honestly, a lot more hopeful. Okay, take a close look at this table. For the women without the conditions, you can see their success rate per cycle actually goes down a bit with each new attempt. But now, look at the women with endometriosis or adenomyosis. Their success rate, it holds remarkably steady, right around that 26 to 30% mark. And that brings us to maybe the most surprising finding of the whole study. That big disadvantage we saw in the first cycle, it starts to shrink. With every single attempt, that gap gets smaller and smaller. In fact, by the time they got to the 3rd cycle, the difference wasn't even statistically significant anymore. So why does that happen? Well, the researchers think it's because doctors are learning and adapting with each cycle. They can make these really crucial adjustments, maybe change up the hormone protocol or use a different fertilization technique. It's all about personalizing the treatment to help overcome the initial hurdles of the conditions. So what's the bottom line here? What does this all add up to? If you persist through all 3 cycles, what are the overall chances of success? Here it is. For the women with endometriosis or adenomyosis who completed all their cycles, the cumulative live birth rate was 70%. And yeah, while that's lower than the 85.7% for the other group, let's be clear, a 70% chance of having a baby is a powerful and very, very hopeful number. Yeah, let's just let that number sink in for a moment. 70%. It tells a powerful story of hope. It says that a failed first cycle, as absolutely heartbreaking as that is not the end of the road. It shows that if you can persist, the odds of having a baby can still be very much in your favor. And in the end, the researchers themselves leave us with this powerful message. This is a direct quote from their conclusion. Negative results after the first treatment should not be an argument to withhold further attempts. It's just such a clear and hopeful takeaway. A difficult start doesn't define the journey. Persistence, it seems, can truly make all the difference.